The deep oceans of Moncala had kept their secrets for 10,000 years, buried beneath pressure so immense that even the Quarren miners refused to descend past the thermocline where light surrendered to eternal cold. But on the day the hyperspace anomaly tore itself open above the northern hemisphere, those secrets rose with a fury that would shake the foundations of galactic order itself. The distortion appeared first as a wound in reality, a spiraling vortex of violet and azure energy that physicist droids later calculated had originated not from any known hyperspace lane, but from a dimensional fracture too deep to map, too old to understand. It collapsed inward, with the sound of a billion stars screaming in unison, and what emerged from that cosmic rupture was not a ship, not a weapon, but something far older than the Republic, far more primal than the Empire that now strangled the galaxy in its iron fist. The seas of Moncala convulsed as the Titan struck the water, displacing entire ocean currents, generating tsunamis 300 meters high that swept toward the floating cities with the inevitability of prophecy. In the depths, something ancient stirred. Opened eyes that had not seen starlight since the age when the Force itself was young, and felt the presence of a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to fear the natural order. Admiral Radus stood on the observation deck of the Profundity, his bulbous eyes narrowing as the holographic display updated with casualty estimates that climbed past acceptable parameters into the realm of catastrophe. The Mon Calamari capital of Dak City was drowning, its repulsor platforms failing under the relentless assault of waves that defied meteorological prediction. Quarren settlements in the mid-depth zones reported seismic disturbances of unprecedented magnitude, fractures in the ocean floor releasing gases that turned entire regions toxic. But what troubled Radus most was the signature his sensor officers could not explain. A thermal bloom in the abyssal trenches that registered hotter than a fusion reactor, yet emanated no radiation, no energy signature consistent with technology. It was biological. It was massive. And it was rising. "Contact Admiral Akbar," Radus commanded, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone who had survived the Clone Wars and understood that the galaxy still held mysteries beyond the Senate's comprehension. "Tell him we need the Rebellion's deep scan arrays focused on Sector 779. Whatever came through that anomaly is still down there, and if the Empire detects it before we do, they will not hesitate to weaponize it." The Quarren tactical officer, a female named Shosara with scars from the separatist occupation still visible on her tentacles, manipulated the sensor grid with practiced efficiency. "Admiral, I'm reading movement. Depth, 11,000 meters. Speed, increasing. Sir, it's big. Bigger than a Providence-class dreadnought. Bigger than anything in our maritime records." Radus felt the familiar weight of command settle across his shoulders, the knowledge that decisions made in the next hours would ripple across the fate of his world. Evacuate the subsurface cities, all of them, reroute every transport we have, and get me a visual on whatever is coming up from the deep. The first images arrived grainy and distorted, captured by automated survey drones designed to map mineral deposits, not document the impossible. But even through the static and pressure-warped footage, the shape was unmistakable. Massive, bipedal. Scales that reflected sonar in patterns suggesting armor thicker than durasteel. Dorsal plates rising from the spine in serrated ridges that glowed with bioluminescent intensity, not with the soft blues and greens of deep-sea life, but with a fierce azure that pulsed in rhythm with something primal, something that predated artificial light by eons. The creature's head was broad and blunt, eyes recessed, beneath heavy brow ridges, jaws capable of crushing starfighter hulls without strain. As it rose through the water column, smaller marine life fled in every direction, entire schools of luminous fish scattering like sparks before a furnace. "By the tides," Shosara whispered, and Radus could not find it in himself to reprimand her lapse in protocol because he felt the same awe, the same creeping realization that they were witnessing something beyond military classification. The Titan breached the surface 5 kilometers from Dak City's eastern platform, and the displacement alone sent shockwaves through the flotation grid. Water cascaded from its hide in torrents, revealing scales that gleamed like polished obsidian under the light of Moncala's twin moons. It stood in water deep enough to submerge corvettes, and still its head rose 30 meters above the waves. The dorsal plates flared with sudden intensity, bathing the surrounding ocean in ethereal blue radiance, and then the creature opened its mouth and roared. The sound was not meant for beings evolved to hear in air and water. It bypassed auditory processing entirely, resonating in bone and marrow, in the deep structures of the brain where instinct ruled and reason faltered. Radus felt his gills flutter involuntarily, his body responding to frequencies that spoke of apex predation, of territorial dominance so absolute that challenge was futile. Across the platform cities, thousands of Moncala and Quarren collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed by the sheer biological authority of that cry. It was a declaration, a warning, a promise that this ocean, this world, now belonged to something that recognized no authority but the primal law of survival. In the Imperial garrison orbiting Moncala, Grand Moff Tarkin received the initial reports with the cold calculation that had made him the Emperor's most trusted architect of fear. He stood in the command chamber of the Star Destroyer Sovereign, hands clasped behind his back, gazing down at the water world through viewports that filtered the light to manageable intensity. The hologram of the creature rotated before him, compiled from orbital scans and the frantic transmissions of Mon Calamari defense forces. Tarkin saw immediately what the rebellion would try to deny, what sentimentality would blind them to understanding. This was not a natural occurrence. This was an opportunity. Lord Vader will want to see this, Tarkin murmured to his adjutant, a thin-faced officer named Royce, who had learned to anticipate his superior's thoughts through years of ruthless service. But first, I want a full biological analysis, tissue density, thermal output, estimated mass, and structural integrity. If this creature can withstand the pressures of the deep ocean, it can withstand bombardment. If it can generate that much thermal energy naturally, it could power a city or level one. Contact Dr. Silo. Tell him the Emperor has a new subject for his augmentation programs. Royce hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before responding. Sir, the creature's size alone makes capture logistically impossible, and the Mon Calamari claim it may be a sacred guardian from their oldest myths. The Deep King, they say, protected their ancestors from extinction during the ancient Ice Age. Tarkin's smile was a blade wrapped in velvet. Myths are useful when they serve the Empire, and dangerous when they inspire rebellion. If the Mon Calamari believe this creature is their protector, they will resist our claim to it. Therefore, we will demonstrate that their gods are as easily controlled as their people, prepare a containment fleet, and activate the Death Star's hyperspace coordinates. I believe Director Krennic will appreciate the opportunity to field test the Superlaser on a target that can actually fight back. In the depths beneath Dak City, the creature now designated Subject Zero by Imperial analysis continued its ascent through the twilight layers where bioluminescence painted the water in constellations of living light. It moved with the slow, deliberate grace of something utterly confident in its dominance, each step sending tremors through the ocean floor that registered on seismographs across the planet. The smaller marine predators, the tentacled horrors that haunted Quarren nightmares and the serpentine leviathans that crushed submersibles in coils of muscle, fled before it without resistance. This was recognition at the cellular level, the acknowledgement of a hierarchy written in DNA older than civilization. But the creature was not hunting, it was searching. The radiation signature that had drawn it through the dimensional rift still pulsed in its awareness, a beacon of concentrated energy that resonated with something fundamental in its biology. For millions of years, it had fed on radiation, bathed in the cores of dying stars, drawn sustenance from the decay of elements that fueled suns. The energy it sensed now was artificial but potent, a concentration of power so dense it registered as a rival, a challenge to territorial supremacy. And so it moved toward the source with the inexorable patience of continental drift, guided by instinct refined across epochs when the galaxy was young and wild. Radus watched the creature's progression on tactical displays, his mind racing through scenarios and countermeasures with the speed born of decades commanding fleets against impossible odds. The rebellion could not allow the Empire to capture this titan, to twist it into another instrument of terror as they had twisted kyber crystals into planet killers. But neither could they destroy it. Not when it might be the very guardian spirit the ancient texts described, returned in the hour of Moncala's greatest need. The path forward was narrow, treacherous, and demanded a gamble that would either save his world or doom it utterly. "Prepare the deep-water submersibles," he ordered, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the command center. "Full scientific complement, no weapons. We're going to try to communicate with it." Shosara turned from her station, disbelief clear in the set of her tentacles. "Admiral, we don't even know if it possesses sentience as we understand it, and if it does, what language could possibly bridge the gap between our species and something that old?" Radus moved to the viewport, watching the creature's dorsal plates glow brighter in the distant water, a constellation of blue fire that seemed almost like a heartbeat, almost like a rhythm that matched the pulse of the planet's core. "We speak the language all living things understand," he said quietly. "We show it we are not a threat, and we hope it understands the difference between guardians and conquerors." The submersible descent took 3 hours, passing through thermoclines and pressure gradients that would have crushed unshielded vessels like tin cans under a hydraulic press. The crew consisted of Radus himself, Shosara, a Quarren xenobiologist named Krolmar who had spent his life studying the deep fauna, and 2 Moncalamari pilots who guided the reinforced craft through currents that could tear apart freighters. They carried no torpedoes, no concussion missiles, only sensor arrays designed to read bioelectric fields and translate them into data that might, if fortune favored them, reveal intent. The water around them darkened from blue to purple to absolute black, lit only by the submersible's external floods and the faint glow of deep-sea creatures that drifted past like organic stars. Krolmar monitored the life sign readings, his voice tense with a mixture of terror and scientific rapture. "I'm detecting a bioelectric field unlike anything in our databases. The neural activity alone suggests a brain mass comparable to a small city, but the organization, the pattern of synaptic firing, it's not chaotic, it's ordered, almost meditative. Can you establish a harmonic frequency?" Radus asked, leaning forward to study the readouts. "If it responds to vibration, to sound as we heard in that roar, perhaps we can create a sequence it recognizes as non-threatening." "Attempting now," Krolmar replied, his webbed fingers dancing across the control interface. He initiated a low-frequency pulse, subsonic waves that traveled through water far more efficiently than air, carrying a simple rhythmic pattern that mathematicians had calculated as the most universally non-aggressive sequence, the galactic equivalent of open palms and lowered weapons. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The creature turned in the water, moving with speed that defied its massive bulk, and suddenly the submersible's floods illuminated a wall of scales 10 meters away. The crew froze, barely breathing, as an eye the size of a viewport focused on them with an intelligence that sent ice through Radus's veins. It was not the blank stare of a predator, evaluating prey. It was assessment, consideration. The eye tracked the submersible's movements, noting the lack of weapons, the non-threatening approach vector, and after a moment that stretched into subjective eternity, the creature turned away, dismissing them as irrelevant to its purpose. "It understands," Radus breathed, wonder momentarily eclipsing tactical concerns. "It knows we're no threat, so it's ignoring us. But what is it focused on?" Krolmar's tentacles trembled as he checked the navigational data. "Admiral, based on its heading and the energy signature it seems to be tracking, it's moving toward the Imperial garrison." specifically toward the concentrated reactor emissions from their star destroyers. "Sir, I think it's registering their power cores as competition for resources." The implications crashed down on Radus like the tsunamis that had devastated his cities. The creature was not attacking. It was responding to what it perceived as a rival in its feeding territory, an interloper radiating energy in spectrums that triggered ancient competitive instincts. And when it reached the Imperial fleet, when it encountered ships bristling with turbolasers and concussion missiles, when frightened commanders opened fire on something they did not understand, the retaliation would be catastrophic. Surface. Now. Radus's command was absolute. "We need to warn Tarkin before his arrogance starts a war with something that makes the rebellion look like a protocol droid malfunction." But in the cold calculus of Imperial strategy, warnings from rebellion sympathizers carried no weight against opportunity. Tarkin had already deployed 3 star destroyers into low orbit, positioning them in a triangle formation that would allow overlapping fields of fire on the ascending Titan. He stood on the bridge of the Sovereign, watching tactical displays update in real time as the creature broke through the final thermocline and entered the shallows where the ocean floor rose toward continental shelves. The size estimates had been revised upward twice. Current projections placed it at 120 meters from tail to crown, with mass exceeding 50,000 metric tons. Conventional weapons might wound it. But Tarkin had not risen to his position through conventional thinking. "Deploy the AT-ATs," he ordered, ignoring the startled looks from junior officers who understood that walker deployment in ocean shallows was tactically absurd. "I want them positioned on the northern beach where the creature is projected to make landfall, and activate the tractor beam arrays. If we can immobilize it long enough for the surgical team to plant cortical probes, we can turn its aggression into a weapon more terrifying than any Death Star." The walkers descended on massive repulsor barges, their 4 legs folding like metallic insects as they were transported to sandy shores where Moncala refugees had fled the tsunamis. They deployed with the mechanical precision that had crushed rebellions on 100 worlds, taking positions that maximized fire convergence while minimizing friendly fire risk. Their pilots, veterans of Kashyyyk and Ryloth, trained to fight Wookiees and Twi'lek guerrillas, now faced a target that dwarfed their vehicles like children's toys before a statue. The creature emerged from the surf at sunset, backlit by Moncala's primary star descending toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and crimson. Water streamed from its hide in cataracts, each drop catching the dying light like falling rubies. The dorsal plates flared with bioluminescence that now seemed almost like challenge, like war paint applied by nature's hand. It took one step onto the sand, then another, moving with the ponderous inevitability of tectonic forces. And it saw the walkers, arrayed before it like metal insects, and recognized them not as living things but as structures, obstacles, annoyances radiating the faint, electromagnetic signatures of their power cores. The first AT-AT fired without waiting for command authorization, a pilot's panic translating into twin blaster bolts that struck the creature's chest with enough force to vaporize durasteel. The impact splashed across the scales like water on stone, scattering in superheated fragments that ignited the sand beneath. The creature paused, tilted its head downward to regard the walker, and its eyes narrowed with something that in any other species would have been interpreted as contempt. "All units, fire at will," Tarkin commanded, his voice cold as the void between stars. "Aim for the joints, the eyes, any vulnerable point. Bring it down." The beach erupted in a storm of blaster fire and concussion missiles, a concentrated barrage that would have leveled a city block, that had leveled city blocks on worlds that dared resist Imperial order. The creature weathered the assault without flinching, each impact absorbed by hide evolved to withstand pressures and temperatures no military engineer had accounted for. Missiles exploded against its flanks, scorching scales but failing to penetrate to flesh. Laser fire traced patterns across its torso, burning away surface layers only to reveal deeper strata of armor beneath. And through it all, the creature simply advanced, closing the distance with steps that sent tremors through the walker's stabilizing gyros. The first AT-AT died when the creature's tail swept through its legs, a casual swipe that sheared through the joints with the ease of a vibroblade through flesh. The walker toppled, crew screaming as gravity inverted, and the cockpit crumpled against the sand hard enough to rupture the power core. The explosion was a brief nova of orange flame that washed over the creature's legs and accomplished nothing but annoying it further. The second walker lasted longer, managing 3 more volleys before massive jaws closed around its command pod and bit down with hydraulic force measured in thousands of tons per square centimeter. The durasteel crumpled like foil, and when the creature tossed the wreckage aside, it trailed sparks and the awful silence of vented atmosphere. Tarkin watched his walkers fall with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing an experiment's failure, already recalculating his approach. Activate the tractor beams, full power. If we cannot pierce its hide, we will hold it in place until the Star Destroyers can achieve firing solutions. The invisible beams lanced down from orbit, gravitic forces designed to capture corvettes and hold them immobile for boarding actions. They seized the creature mid-stride, arresting its momentum with a jolt that should have torn lesser beings apart. For a moment, it struggled against the beams, muscles bunching beneath the scales, tail thrashing against restraint. And then, the dorsal plates flared brighter, pulsing with accelerating rhythm, and the creature opened its mouth. The beam that erupted from its jaws was not fire, not plasma, not any energy weapon catalogued in Imperial arsenals. It was atomic breath, the concentrated fury of a living fusion reactor channeled through biological structures that defied physics as Tarkin understood them. The beam was blue-white incandescence, coherent radiation that sliced through atmosphere with a roar like reality itself screaming in protest. It struck the first Star Destroyer's ventral shields and burned through them in seconds, molten metal cascading from the breach as internal decks explosively decompressed. The beam tracked upward, cutting through the destroyer's superstructure from keel to bridge, and when it finally dissipated, the ship hung in orbit for 3 heartbeats before breaking in half, both sections tumbling toward the ocean in flames that would burn until they struck water deep enough to quench steel heated beyond melting point. Tarkin's facade cracked for the first time in years, his eyes widening as he watched a vessel that had cost billions of credits and represented the Emperor's unlimited power die in less time than it took to voice a command. All ships, retreat to high orbit, disengage tractor beams immediately, and contact Director Krennic, tell him to accelerate the Death Star's arrival. We are dealing with something that conventional forces cannot contain, but in the depths of the Force, in the currents of energy that bound all living things in a web of cause and effect stretching across the galaxy, something stirred in response to the Titan's fury. On the incomplete Death Star, still under construction in orbit above Scarif, Darth Vader stood in his meditation chamber and felt the disturbance ripple through the cosmic fabric like a stone cast into still water. He reached out with senses beyond sight, tasting the presence that had manifested on Moncala, and what he found troubled him in ways that lightsaber duels and rebel ambushes never could. This was not a creature of the dark side, not corrupted by Sith alchemy or twisted through unnatural means. It simply existed, a living engine of destruction so primal that the Force flowed around it rather than through it, unable to touch something that predated the very concepts of light and dark. "Interesting," Vader murmured, his vocabulator rendering the word in tones of mechanical menace. "The Emperor will want to study this. But first, it must be tested." He turned from his meditation, cape swirling in the recycled air of the chamber, and strode toward the hangar where his personal shuttle waited. If this creature could destroy Star Destroyers with biological weaponry, if it could shrug off the Empire's conventional arsenal, then only the dark side of the Force wielded by one who had mastered its deepest teachings could hope to challenge it. And if he could capture it, if he could bend it to serve the Emperor's will as he had been bent, then the rebellion would face annihilation not from constructed battle stations, but from a living god dragged from the depths and chained with the Force itself. The shuttle's descent toward Moncala was accompanied by a growing sense of anticipation that Vader had not experienced since his duel with Obi-Wan on Mustafar. He could feel the creature's presence even from orbit, a mass in the Force like a black hole in space, distorting everything around it through sheer existential weight. It was not malevolent. It was not benevolent. It simply was, an expression of nature so pure that morality became meaningless in its shadow. And as the shuttle broke through cloud cover and descended toward the beach where the Titan now stood among the smoking wreckage of AT-ATs, Vader allowed himself a moment of dark humor. The Emperor sought to rule the galaxy through fear of artificial superweapons, but here was fear incarnate, born from the universe's own forge, and it bowed to no one. The creature registered the shuttle's approach with the same attention it had given the submersible, which was to say almost none. It had destroyed the immediate threats, dispersed the metal insects that had dared attack it, and now stood in the surf, dorsal plates cooling from white-hot to merely incandescent blue, waiting for the next challenge or the next source of radiation to pursue. When the shuttle landed and the boarding ramp descended, when the black-armored figure strode down to stand on sand still glowing from atomic fire, the creature finally turned its full attention towards something it recognized instinctively as dangerous. Vader ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade hissing to life and casting bloody shadows across the sand. "You are powerful," he said, his voice amplified through the Force to carry across the beach like thunder. "But power without purpose is merely chaos. Serve the Empire, and your strength will reshape the galaxy. Refuse, and I will show you that even gods can be broken." The creature's response was to take one deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them to 30 meters, and fix Vader with eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. There was no recognition of language, no comprehension of political ideology or Imperial doctrine. There was only the acknowledgement that this small being radiated a presence in the world that went beyond mere physical form, that it commanded energies similar in some ways to the radiation the creature fed upon but twisted, corrupted, fundamentally wrong in ways that triggered defensive instincts. Vader felt the creature's assessment through the Force and smiled beneath his mask. "So be it. Let us see which of us is the true apex predator." He raised his hand and seized the creature with the Force, channeling power drawn from rage and pain and the dark side's infinite hunger. Invisible pressure clamped down on the Titan from all directions, a telekinetic vice that had crushed AT-STs and crumpled blast doors. The creature stumbled, surprised by resistance that came from no physical source, and Vader pressed his advantage, pouring more of his power into the assault. He could feel the creature's confusion, its inability to fight an enemy it could not see or strike, and he exploited that confusion ruthlessly, forcing it to one knee in the surf. But confusion was not defeat. The creature's biology, refined across millions of years of evolution, adapted with a speed that shocked even Vader's considerable expertise. The dorsal plates flared, and suddenly the Force itself recoiled from the Titan's body as it began to radiate energy across spectrums that disrupted the fundamental bonds Vader used to manipulate matter. The telekinetic grip shattered like glass under pressure, and the creature rose to its full height, fixing Vader with a gaze that now held something new. Recognition, challenge. The understanding that here was an opponent worth genuine effort. Vader ignited his full power, drawing on reserves he rarely accessed, pulling energy from the dying Star Destroyer's wreckage, from the fear of Imperial troops watching from orbit, from the dark side nexus on Moncala's ocean floor, where ancient Sith had conducted experiments millennia past. He channeled that power into Force lightning, bolts of purple-white electricity that leaped from his outstretched hands and struck the creature's chest with the sound of worlds ending. The lightning scarred the scales, burned through outer layers to the flesh beneath, and for the first time since emerging from the depths, the creature roared in pain. But pain only enraged it. The atomic breath charged in its throat, bioluminescence racing up the dorsal plates from tail to crown, and Vader had a split second to recognize the danger before the beam erupted with focused hatred. He threw up a force barrier, bending reality itself into a shield that absorbed the initial impact, but the sustained assault was beyond even his capacity to deflect. The barrier cracked, the beam broke through, and Vader was forced to leap aside, his cape igniting from proximity to radiation that exceeded anything his armor was designed to withstand. They circled each other on that burning beach, Sith Lord and Primordial Titan, each reassessing the other with new respect. Vader recognized that brute force would not suffice, that he needed subtlety, precision, the application of power to vulnerabilities rather than frontal assault. The creature recognized that this opponent commanded forces that could harm it, that treating it as another metal insect would lead to injury or worse. The stalemate held for 3 heartbeats. And then the sky split open with the sound of hyperspace rupture, and the Death Star emerged from the void like a moon cast down by angry gods. Tarkin's voice crackled across Vader's comlink, smug satisfaction poorly concealed beneath professional courtesy. "Lord Vader, I trust you have tested the creature's capabilities sufficiently. The Emperor has authorized use of the Superlaser at minimum power. Please withdraw to a safe distance. We are about to demonstrate why natural evolution, however impressive, cannot compete with Imperial engineering." Vader looked up at the battle station occluding the stars, then back at the creature, which had also turned its attention skyward. He felt something shift in the Force, a perturbation he could not quite identify. And for the first time since landing, he considered the possibility that Tarkin's arrogance might be leading them toward catastrophe rather than triumph. "Tarkin, I recommend we reconsider this approach. The creature is not a simple beast. It is something else. Something the Force cannot fully touch." "Your concerns are noted and dismissed," Tarkin replied, already signaling the firing sequence. "All personnel, withdraw from targeting zone. Superlaser discharge in 60 seconds. The creature watched the Death Star with tilted head, processing the massive energy readings, emanating from the station's reactor core with instincts that had evolved to seek out exactly such concentrations of power. It did not understand what the Death Star was. It did not comprehend the political machinations or the strategic calculations. It understood only that here, finally, was a rival worthy of its full strength. A concentration of radiation so dense it could sustain the creature for centuries if claimed as territory. The dorsal plates flared again, brighter than they had against the Star Destroyers, a bioluminescent challenge thrown across the void. Vader felt the shift in the creature's intent and triggered his comlink even as he force-leaped toward the shuttle. "Tarkin, abort firing sequence. It's interpreting the Death Star as a territorial threat. If you fire, you will trigger." The superlaser discharged at 8% power, a green beam of coherent energy that crossed the distance from station to planet in less than a second and struck the ocean 300 meters from where the creature stood. The impact vaporized a cubic kilometer of water instantly, generating a pressure wave that flattened the remaining AT-AT wrecks and threw up a column of steam visible from orbit. The creature vanished in the blast, and for a moment the Imperial command staff allowed themselves to believe the engagement was concluded. Then the steam cleared, and the creature stood unchanged, shielded from the worst of the blast by armor and cellular structures that had survived far worse in the radioactive depths of its home dimension. But it was no longer stationary. It charged the ocean at full speed, each stride covering 30 meters, and dove beneath the waves with the grace of something born to the water. Tracking arrays lost it immediately, the creature's biology somehow scattering sensor returns despite its massive size. Vader reached his shuttle as the first panicked reports filtered up from the fleet. Thermal signature detected, rising through mid-depth. Currents, speed 200 knots, and accelerating. It's using the ocean currents to slingshot toward orbit. How is that possible? Estimate intercept with Death Star in 4 minutes unless we can. The rest of the transmission was lost as every sensor on Moncala registered a massive energy spike. not from the Death Star, but from the depths. The creature breached the surface 15 kilometers from its dive point, and the acceleration of its leap carried it out of the atmosphere on a ballistic arc impossible for anything with mass measured in tens of thousands of tons. But impossible was a word the creature had never learned. It rose toward the Death Star like a missile, dorsal plates blazing with the stored energy of the superlaser blast it had absorbed through mechanisms Imperial scientists would spend years failing to explain, and opened its jaws to release atomic fire in the vacuum of space. The beams struck the Death Star's equatorial trench, burning through shield emitters and armor plating with the same contemptuous ease it had shown against the Star Destroyer. Alarms shrieked through every corridor as hull breaches vented atmosphere and crew into the void. Tarkin's composure finally shattered as he watched damage reports multiply beyond containment. All batteries, focus fire on the creature, turbolasers, ion cannons, everything we have. Kill it now. The Death Star's defensive armament was designed to repel fleet-scale assaults, thousands of weapons covering every approach vector with overlapping fields of fire. That firepower now concentrated on a single target that maneuvered in space with the same fluid grace it had shown in the ocean, using brief bursts of atomic breath as makeshift propulsion, twisting around turbo laser volleys and through ion cannon spreads with agility that mocked its bulk. It landed on the station's surface with impact that registered on seismographs across Moncala, claws finding purchase in the trench network, and began to tear through the superstructure toward the reactor core, it sensed pulsing beneath layers of armor and shielding. Inside the station, Krennic watched his life's work being dismantled by something that should not exist and made the decision that would define his legacy. Charge the superlaser to full power. Target our own coordinates. We will destroy the creature, even if we must sacrifice the station. Tarkin's voice cut across the command channel like a blade. Belay that order. Director Krennic, you will stand down immediately. The Emperor does not invest resources in weapons designed to self-destruct. Lord Vader, can you remove the creature from the station's hull? Vader, already in space, using the Force to sustain himself in the void, as only the most powerful dark side users could manage, approached the creature as it ripped through another section of trench. I can try, but Tarkin, this creature is not something that can be controlled. It must be driven away, or, he paused, considering an option he rarely entertained, or we must retreat and accept that some battles cannot be won through force alone. Before Tarkin could respond with the arrogance that had doomed lesser men, the creature's claws pierced the primary reactor shielding and bathed it in radiation pure enough to ignite desire in its ancient brain. It plunged its head into the breach and began to feed, drawing energy directly from the kyber-powered core with a hunger born from dimensions where sustenance came only from the death of stars. The Death Star shuddered, power fluctuating as the creature drained reserves meant to fuel continent-destroying weapons, and Vader felt the Emperor's presence suddenly flooding the Force like a dark tide. Palpatine's hologram materialized on the bridge, his wizened features twisted in fury that transcended political calculation and touched genuine rage. What is the meaning of this disaster? Tarkin, you assured me the Death Star was impregnable. Vader, you claimed you could control any creature through the Force. And now I watch my weapon, my masterpiece, being devoured by an animal. Vader knelt in the void, using the Force to project his voice across the distance. Master, this is no ordinary creature. It exists outside the Force's normal dominion. I can harm it, even slow it, but control is impossible. I recommend we withdraw the Death Star and deploy it against the creature, from a distance where its maneuverability becomes irrelevant. Palpatine's eyes narrowed, lightning crackling at his fingertips in unconscious response to his anger. No, I will not flee from a beast, no matter how powerful. Vader, you will drive it from my station. Use whatever methods necessary. Kill it if you can. Wound it if you cannot. But remove it before it reaches the hypermatter core, or the explosion will sterilize this entire system. The command was absolute, and Vader rose to obey, channeling the dark side into a focused spear of will that he drove into the creature's mind. He expected resistance. He expected animal cunning and predatory focus. What he encountered instead froze him in momentary shock. The creature's consciousness was vast, ancient, beyond his capacity to measure, filled with memories of feeding on cosmic radiation in the hearts of dying galaxies, of sleeping through eons and waking to feast on stars gone nova. It recognized Vader's intrusion the way a human might notice a gnat, with mild annoyance and instinctive swat. The psychic backlash threw Vader across space. His concentration shattered, his connection to the Force momentarily disrupted by contact with something so fundamentally other that the dark side itself recoiled. He caught himself through desperate effort, stabilizing his orbit, just in time to see the creature finish its feeding and turn its attention back to the Death Star's interior. It had tasted the reactor. It wanted more, and it would tear the station apart to reach the hypermatter core that promised sustenance beyond anything it had encountered in this galaxy. Vader made his choice in the span of a heartbeat, drawing on skills he had not used since before his fall, before the pain and the mask and the service to darkness that defined him now. He reached out not with aggression but with understanding, touching the creature's mind with the barest whisper of the light side techniques Obi-Wan had taught him a lifetime ago. He showed it images of other feeding grounds, nebulae rich with radiation, stellar nurseries where newborn stars shed energy in abundance. He offered it a bargain in the only language it could comprehend, the promise of resources elsewhere if it would abandon this prize. The creature paused, claws still embedded in the Death Star's hull, and considered the offering with the careful deliberation of something that had survived eons by never expending more energy than necessary. It sensed the truth in Vader's projection, recognized the existence of feeding grounds that did not require fighting metal insects or dodging green beams that stung even when they did not wound. And it was satiated, for now, the reactor's energy settling into specialized organs that would sustain it for months. There was no reason to fight further when easier sustenance existed elsewhere. It released its grip on the Death Star and pushed away with a final burst of atomic breath, propelling itself on a trajectory that would carry it past Moncala's orbit and toward the system's asteroid belt. Vader tracked its departure through the Force, ensuring it was truly leaving, and felt the Emperor's rage focus on him like a burning lens. "Explain yourself," Palpatine hissed, the hologram flickering with the intensity of his emotion. "Why did you let it escape when I commanded you to destroy it?" Vader met his master's gaze without flinching, speaking truth that he rarely dared voice. "Because I could not destroy it, my master, and neither could the Death Star. That creature is a force of nature given flesh, as far beyond our weapons as we are beyond insects. If I had continued the assault, it would have torn the station apart in retaliation, and we would have lost everything. Instead, I have driven it away, and it will not return unless we give it reason." The silence stretched long enough for stars to be born and die in the cosmic background. Then Palpatine smiled, a terrible expression that promised future reckoning. "Very well, Lord Vader, you have saved my weapon from destruction, but you have also revealed a limitation I had not anticipated. We will study the data from this encounter. We will learn how the creature resists the Force, how it generates such power, and we will find a way to replicate it. This is not defeat. It is merely postponement of inevitable victory." The hologram vanished, and Vader was left alone in space, watching the creature's silhouette recede against the stars. He thought of Padme, of the Jedi Order, of all the forces he had believed could be controlled through sufficient strength and will. The creature had taught him in the span of minutes what decades of service to the dark side had obscured, that some powers existed beyond dominion, that the universe still held mysteries the Sith could not corrupt and the Empire could not chain. On Moncala's surface, Radus stood among the ruins of Dak City and watched the battle through long-range scopes, his mind cataloging every detail for the reports he would send to the rebellion's leadership. The Empire had thrown Star Destroyers, Walkers, and the Death Star itself against a single creature and failed to bring it down. If the Mon Calamari could study what had happened, if they could understand how the creature had survived, perhaps there were lessons that could help the rebellion survive as well. It's heading toward the outer system, Shosara reported, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and relief. Sensor data suggests it settled into a slow drift toward the asteroid belt. Admiral, what was it? Really? Radus considered the question, sorting through ancient texts and legends his grandmother had told him when he was still young enough to believe in monsters that protected the deep places. The old stories called it the Deep King, the guardian that rose when Moncala faced extinction. Perhaps those stories were memories of something real, something that existed before hyperspace lanes and star destroyers. Or perhaps it's something entirely new, a creature from beyond our galaxy drawn here by forces we don't understand. He turned to face his tactical officer, his expression grave. But whatever it is, it has shown us that the Empire's power is not absolute. And that, my friend, is a truth worth more than 100 battle stations. In the weeks that followed, the Empire issued no official statements about the engagement on Moncala. The destroyed Star Destroyer was attributed to rebel sabotage. The damaged Death Star was quietly repaired in a classified shipyard. And Subject Zero, as Imperial reports designated it, was relegated to the deepest classification levels, discussed only in briefings attended by Palpatine himself and the handful of advisors trusted with the Empire's darkest secrets. But in the rebellion, among Mon Calamari fleet officers and the scattered resistance cells fighting across the galaxy, the story spread in whispers and encrypted transmissions. A creature had defied the Empire's might and survived. A living thing had faced the Death Star and walked away unbroken. And if such a thing could exist, if nature itself could still produce forces beyond Imperial control, then perhaps hope was not the foolish dream the Emperor claimed. The creature, unaware of the political ripples its existence had caused, drifted through the asteroid belt and found a dense cluster of radioactive minerals, the remnants of a planet destroyed in some ancient cataclysm. It settled among the debris, drawing sustenance from isotopes that had decayed across eons, and slept the deep sleep of something utterly content. The galaxy spun on around it, empires rose and fell, and the creature dreamed of the dimension it had left behind, of oceans deeper than space, and radiation storms that painted the darkness in colors no living eye could perceive. It would wake again when hunger demanded, or when some new challenge emerged. Until then, it rested, patient as continents and just as inevitable. Vader returned to his meditation chamber on the Death Star and sat in darkness for 3 days, contemplating the encounter that had shaken his certainty more than any duel with Jedi survivors. The dark side offered power, offered mastery over the Force and dominion over lesser beings. But that creature had existed utterly apart from such concerns, following imperatives so ancient and primal that the philosophies of Sith and Jedi seemed like children arguing over toys in its presence. He had touched its mind, and felt the weight of eons, the grinding passage of time measured not in years, but in the birth and death of stars. "What are you?" he whispered to the darkness, knowing no answer would come. "And what does your existence mean for everything we believe about power and control?" The Force offered no insights, no revelation to ease his troubled thoughts, and so Vader did what he had always done when confronted with questions too large for immediate answers. He filed the experience away, catalogued the data, and prepared for the inevitable moment when the Emperor would demand he capture or kill the creature, regardless of cost. He would obey because obedience was all he had left, but he would remember that brief moment of light-side connection, that instant of understanding before the creature had accepted his offering and departed in peace. It was a technique he had sworn never to use again after his fall. Yet it had succeeded where all his dark side might had failed. Perhaps there were lessons in that, perhaps not. But the possibility haunted him through the long watches of reconstructed nights, a ghost of the Jedi he had been whispering that some battles were won not through greater strength, but through wisdom to know when strength was insufficient. On Coruscant, in the deepest levels of the Imperial Palace, Palpatine reviewed the encounter data with an obsession that eclipsed even his interest in hunting down the remaining Jedi. He watched the footage of the creature's atomic breath 100 times, analyzing the energy output, the biomechanical structures that channeled fusion-level power without vaporizing organic tissue. He studied Vader's reports on the Force immunity, the way the creature's mere presence distorted the cosmic fabric. And he convened a secret council of his most brilliant scientists, geneticists, and Sith alchemists who had pushed the boundaries of life and death in the Empire's shadowed laboratories. "Recreate it," he commanded, his voice allowing no possibility of failure. "I want a weapon that combines that creature's resilience with the obedience of our stormtroopers. Something we can deploy against the rebellion, against the Jedi if any still hide, against anyone who dares defy Imperial order. The creature itself may be beyond our immediate reach, but its principles, its biological mechanisms, those can be studied, replicated, improved." The scientists bowed and scattered to their work, and Palpatine smiled his terrible smile. The creature had humiliated him, had damaged his Death Star, and revealed limitations in his grand design. But setbacks were merely opportunities for those patient enough to learn from them. He would study this Titan from the deep. He would unravel its secrets. And when he was done, when his scientists had distilled its power into something controllable, he would unleash horrors that made the creature look like a domesticated pet by comparison. The galaxy held many secrets, many mysteries left, over from civilizations older than the Republic. But Palpatine had spent a lifetime learning to twist such discoveries to serve his will. This would be no different. This was simply a new challenge, a new avenue to ultimate power. And if the creature ever returned, ever threatened his dominion again, it would find not the flawed weapons of this encounter but perfected instruments of its own destruction, born from its stolen biology and wielded with the Sith's absolute ruthlessness. Far from the machinations of empire and rebellion, beyond the range of even the most powerful hyperdrives, the dimensional rift that had birthed the creature's arrival remained as a barely perceptible scar in space-time. It pulsed occasionally with energies that defied measurement, echoing with calls from the creature's home dimension where others of its kind still dwelt in radioactive oceans beneath dying stars. The creature felt those calls in its sleep, ancient bonds that transcended distance and dimensional boundaries. And in its dreams, it answered with visions of this new galaxy, this place of abundant energy and strange metal insects that sometimes challenged but more often fled. The scar pulsed once more, stronger than before, and somewhere in the void between dimensions, something vast stirred in response. The creature was not alone. It had never been alone. It was simply the first to cross the barrier, drawn by chance, and the Death Star's unique energy signature bleeding across dimensional walls. But barriers once breached could be crossed again, and in the depths beyond space, in realms where physics operated under rules that would shatter mortal minds, other creatures heard the call and began the slow, patient journey toward a galaxy that had no idea how small its weapons truly were. But that was a threat for another day, another era when the Empire had fallen or transformed, when the rebellion had won or been crushed, when new powers rose from the ashes of the old. For now, the creature slept among asteroids, and the galaxy spun on in ignorance of the precedent that had been set. A door had been opened, a bridge had been formed, and the universe, in its infinite complexity and terrible beauty, cared nothing for the fears or ambitions of beings who believed they could control it through Death Stars and dark side mastery. The ocean tides of Moncala rose and fell according to ancient rhythms older than civilization. The stars burned in patterns mapped by cultures millennia dead. And somewhere in the deep places, in the spaces between dimensions and the gaps in understanding, the universe kept its secrets and prepared its next revelation for a galaxy that had grown too confident in its knowledge of what was possible.